Human resources employees. What are your best hour nightmare stories? I had a friend working at GM when our thought it was a good idea to test everyone on the skill set needed for their department regardless of how long they were in their position. Long careers, 15, 20, 25 years were ruined because even though they worked there for a long time with a long string of great performance reviews, they didn't pass the test that measured what our thought was required for the department. Say you're a materials expert working in a design department. You may know barely enough in the CAD system to draw a cylinder. On the other hand, given a cylinder, you can whip out all the properties that cylinder would have if it were made from aluminum, cold rolled steel, fiberglass, etc. You'd be out of your job because ours said you had to have a certain level of CAD expertise, even if it wasn't relevant to your role in the design process. I work in ours and we recently moved from one HRIS system to another system manages personal information like benefits, time of requests, contact information, etc. Part of the transitioning is teaching the workforce how to use the app. There are a lot of challenges including the boomers who are technology illiterate, employees who speak very little English, and managers who think learning the system is below their pay grade. I'm normally pretty patient with the language barrier, is not like I'm bilingual either, so if they have the basics of English as a second language they already know more than I do. This one fine day, I had a constrained team of employees trying to figure out how to access the system in their phones despite the step-by-step, written and pictorial instructions, when I have this one older individual ask me to help him. Nothing but 30 hardcore porn would come up on his smartphone browser. He legit couldn't understand why I couldn't help him. The browser just kept going back to porn, no matter what I typed in. I usually feel like I can figure people's phones out, but I reached my limit. I couldn't tell if the poor guy had a virus on his phone or if he was messing with me. Creepy old guy my father's age, barely speaks English, and not embarrassed by the raunchy porn stuck on his screen. I told him to go get his phone cleaned up and don't come back with it until he fixed it. I haven't seen him since. The nightmare of an hour employee potentially causing the hour nightmare. I took a grad course meant to prep future school principals on our stuff. One of our assignments was to ask our current principal for redacted copies of disciplinary letters they'd written to use as examples, to practice writing our own. This assignment seemed sketchy from the get-go, but whatever, it's grad school and I want an A. The course was taught by the hour director who'd helped hire me and my building principal in the same school year. The principal didn't have any letters from before I started there, so just gave me a couple random ones. Somehow the professor was still surprised when I came to class knowing all the details of each write-up despite the absence of detail in the letters. The professor flipped out a little because he was worried the principal had broken some confidentiality rule. It was actually just that I happened to be friends with the two that had been written up. Teacher hours is a nightmare unto itself. Not ours myself, but a co-worker of mine is undoubtedly one. I'll call him Jay, and I'll preface this by saying yes, these are true stories with some details omitted to protect both our identities, and that I don't know how he's managed to stay employed for 15 plus years. My closest guess is because he outlasts all the managers he gets his final warning from. He's outlasted at least 5 managers. Also, this isn't America and the age of consent here is 16. TL. Dr. J essentially Skyped a naked woman in the staff/break room and hit on a barely legal age co-worker until she got a restraining order against him. My first month into my job, Jay comes into the crowded staff room with his phone and earphones plugged in. The door leading to the outside area was locked, so he sat in the middle of the staff room and talked to the woman on his phone. I finish up my break and head back to work, whereupon a few minutes later, the hour's head leads my manager, Jay's sister, our co-worker, and our assistant manager to her office. I wasn't told anything by them, however I just spent my break talking to a woman from another department, who was also on break long enough to see what happened. Jay had started dirty talking a naked woman on his phone in the middle of the staff room and was egging her on to show him more while in the still crowded staff room. One of the other employees looked over his shoulder to confirm what he was doing, then reported him to ours. He was monitored on break for a week or so, then back to normal. After a year of me working there, we got help from a 16-year-old student who would work on weekends. Jay has a history of shady business with younger women. He wanted to run away with a 16-year-old Welsh girl he met on a dating app, and he harassed a high school Burger King server every day until she quit. He was assigned to work late at night with her one night, just the two of them. A few days later we are informed that an incident has caused Jay to be suspended for 2 weeks. Eventually he came back and accidentally let some details slip that led us to piece together that he'd acted inappropriate and sexually harassed her to the point she reported and then filed a restraining order against him. He was suspended, but came back early because she quit. Likely she wasn't happy that they didn't do much until she literally got a restraining order against him. That time he seemed to have finally learned his lesson. We had a new girl about 18, 19 start working there, and she said that he never speaks to her when they're working together. Even when she'd ask a question he'd just stare, awkwardly laugh and wander off. They still assign him to work with her despite his past offenses because of staff shortages and, in my opinion, mismanagement. Not in ours, but my previous senior manager was renowned for sleeping with colleagues. He was married with kids. Before I started there, I remember seeing a huge banner plastered across a footbridge that everyone leaving work by car had to drive under to get to the motorway. The sign said, "Joe Blogs," not actual name. Cheating bastard. Turns out he was cheating on his wife with a team leader from another dept and was cheating on his mistress with another team leader from yet another department. Both the team leaders found out about each other and had a massive fight in the reception of the building. By the time I started at the company, both of the team leaders were no longer working there. I have a question for hours. When I was working for an assisted living/hospice facility, workers would leave their shift without checking on numerous residents, leaving them soiled and in the same clothing for 2 days. I reported it 2 hours and they did nothing about it. Why would you choose not to do anything about that sort of situation? In the end, I had to quit. I was going home upset daily. My favorite was the dude who would have meetings with his boss via camera. He was remote, and while they discussed his abysmal performance, he would have naked women get up from his bed and walk around. He was told this was inappropriate several times. Continued. We fired him for fraud, a separate issue that was like a Tarantino film, but gives too much away here. Not ours, but I had a coworker at a bakery who quit in a most spectacular fashion. She was quirky to say the least. The first time I met her, I was shoulder deep in a big bowl of buttercream when I felt a hard slap on my ass. I turned around, totally shocked, my arm covered in frosting, to see a total stranger. She grinned and said, "Hey, girlfriend. Which one's your favorite Prince song?" I said I wasn't sure, and she responded, "Me neither, but if I had to pick, I'd take broccoli over asparagus any day." One day she was working up front, making coffees and helping customers and what have you. She was in the midst of filling the honey container that went out for customers to use for their coffees. This was a messy, sticky job as the honey came in a 50-pound tub and it needed to go into one of those tiny bears. Our manager asked her to come to the back for a second. I was back by the ovens pulling out a rack of cookies and I overheard the manager informing her that she was being written up for tardiness, which was fair. She was 15 to 30 minutes late every day. He asked her to sign a document saying that she had been informed of the write-up so it could go in her file. Girlfriend lost her mind. She started shouting and insulted everything from his choice of shoes to his wife's hair to the way he walked. She then threw her hat at him, ripped off her shirt, buttons and all, tossed it on his desk while shouting, "I quit your dumbass job." She then proceeded to take off her pants as well, tossed them in the guy's face and left. She walked across the bakery, through a line of customers, across the parking lot, and out to the bus, stopped to wait for the bus while shouting, wearing only her undergarments, and smeared with sticky honey. Our co-workers were giving the manager some very dirty looks. The thing that has always baffled me about this whole exchange is that the hat and shirt were issued by the bakery and had the logo on them, but the pants belonged to girlfriend. Why in the world did she decide to take off the pants too? Edit to change kid bowl to big bowl. Very different meanings there. TL. Dr. Troublesome employee receives harassment complaint within a week of being transferred to one of our best no-issue locations. Was guilty. Was fired. Was a creep/big man baby. I haven't been able to tell this story for so long. I managed this smaller company and also served as the hour guy. Had this one employee who needed rides to work for a short while, so I'd pick him up when he needed one. One day I go to pick him up, and as we are driving away he very calmly tries to explain that one of the employees of the company we were servicing had approached him, saying that another one of our employees basically cornered her in the break room and kept trying to get close to her, flexing by saying he had family that were higher ups in the company she worked for, and kept trying to ask where she lived for some reason. There was more to it that I can't quite remember, but basically he was hitting on her. Would. Once he had said trapped her in the break room, I U-turned and sped back to the site, running frantically inside and finding the girl, who I actually knew from high school somewhat vaguely. I pull her aside and ask about what happened. She repeated basically the same thing to me. Thing is, this guy's married, but the way she quoted him, it definitely sounded like she was telling the truth. And we had zero problems up to this point. I had no reason to believe she would just do this out of nowhere. I apologized profusely and told her she would never have to see him here again. She was very kind and understanding. With the other employee still in my car, I speed to the other guy's house, let's call him Dan, and knock on his door. He answers and immediately I demand the keys for the on-site vehicle. Once he hands them over, I unleash hell. So I heard this interesting story that you wouldn't leave this girl alone and you kept trying to ask where she lived and wouldn't let her leave the break room. He immediately glances back over his shoulder because his wife is nearby in the kitchen and comes outside and closes the door. He talks in whispers. I didn't talk to anyone. Me, they have cameras, so how about I go ask security to take a look. Dan starts trying to guide me over to the parking lot away from his front door as his wife cracks it open to listen in on what's going on. I was in the break room with some chick, but I didn't do anything except say hello and asked if I would be in her way for cleaning. I was pissed. I could tell by the way he was acting he was desperate for me not to say anything. Me, I find it odd we've had that location for over a year, and a week after I put you there I get the first harassment complaint I have ever had to deal with. He tried getting all puffy chested, saying shit like how dare you question my integrity, and won't even let me hear my side of the story. So were you blocking the doorway so she couldn't leave or not? No. I shrug. Okay, fine. I'm going to go back and see what the cameras have, and if I see otherwise then you're fired. Then I start walking away and he shouts out, then I'm done, illa snap. Great. Pick up your last check tomorrow from *****, so I don't have to deal with you ever again. This guy was a pain, twice my age. This was his second job. Always tried to make himself seem vital, while he would also complain about any job I put him on. It all just kind of came out right then and there. So I leave and ignore the argument between he and his wife that breaks out, and I get into my car and drive off. Other employee riding with me breaks the silence with, so we are good, right? Lol. Anyways, went back and saw footage of him definitely obstructing the doorway when she was obviously trying to get out. Several minutes of conversation, no sound, just passage of time. Passed by him at the store the other day, but this happened a couple years ago. My company used to give branded gifts to our clients. One employee volunteered to drive one about an hour away, and he took another employee with him. What he didn't tell anyone is that he didn't have a license, his car was unregistered, and his brakes were bad. So inevitably his brakes failed while trying to stop at an intersection, and he totaled his car. Thankfully no one was seriously hurt, but he got into trouble when the cops came. So many stories. Lots of theft, lots of petty bullshit, calling anything and everything harassment and/or discrimination. Generally acting like kindergarteners. Looking at porn at work. I could go on and on and on. I've got a good one. Last place I worked was a crappy internet company. I was on tech support. The higher ups fed us all lies to tell customers when their service was bad. The GM at the time was a smile at you when you talk to him and then humiliate you in front of everyone kind of boss. And the owner was a family friend of my wife, a youth leader for the church and young marrieds group. But at work he was rude, cussed at us, total fake act. I was working a pretty entry level position at the time, but my wife ended up with a health diagnosis that required us to need more money for treatments. So I set up a meeting with owner, expressed my struggle, and asked for growth opportunities and training to move up in the company. He seemed like he genuinely cared and said we'd talk again soon. Mind you, he spent half of every year in Austria for the youth program, so getting to sit down with him was a rare opportunity. Side note, a few projects he put me on required all his logins to manage his Yelp page and have him sign off to have a graphic designer paid for a troubleshooting guide we designed. I sent maybe 7 emails requesting the same info and he would never reply. Anyways, a week goes by and then he calls me into the office. Here I'm all stoked for some good news. He proceeded to point out how the projects he put me on weren't complete. I tried to explain the reason, but he didn't want to hear it. And then he began mocking me using a stupid voice about how my wife had health issues and that I needed more money. And laughed at me, tore me a new one, then fired me on the spot. Of course I could go into the aftermath, but there is a satisfying ending here. A couple years later it comes out that a family in Virginia is pressing charges against him in regards to some things he did with an underage girl. Mind you, he's a good looking guy in his early 30s with a wife and 3 young boys. Turns out he was conducting private Bible studies with some of the girls overseas, having them pray together and then make them pleasure him. Yeah, dude's in jail in Virginia for 7+ years. Your sin always finds you out. Guy got chick hooked on meth. She started going around sleeping with a lot of people. Drugs were done in the building. All parties got fired and the chick ended up on Springer after a few months to prove to her ex that the kid was his and not one of the other 5 guys she was screwing. 1. I had a bookkeeper that paid himself 2 checks every week. We did not catch it for a year. 2. Another bookkeeper quit and files for unemployment. He then claimed a claim with the OC that he had a disability and we failed to make accommodations for him. The disability was alcoholism and the accommodations were leaving early to attend AA meetings. Seriously, we had to hire a lawyer to fight that. 3. A guy I hired hurt himself on the first hour of the first day of work. He claimed he fell and hit his head on the wall. He was out for weeks on workman's comp from the concussion. Then when he came back on light duty, he could only do desk work, but managed to fall again in the bathroom and hit his head again. It took me 9 months to get rid of him. It turns out this was not his first rodeo. When I called his former employer, the lady I spoke to made an offhand comment about workplace accidents and head injuries and the importance of cameras in the workplace. 4. While doing a remodel of museum, one of my employees helped himself to a gun that was on display. It was very ugly and embarrassing for everyone. My company was kicked off the job and banned from ever working for them again. I fired the guy and he filed a discrimination claim with the OC because I did not fire the whole crew, just him. I got more.